25 years ago, a black mechanic named David Walker made a choice that would destroy his life and save 3 others. He took in 3 homeless kids he found digging through trash behind his shop. The cops warned him he was making a mistake. The neighbors called him a fool, and when they framed him for robbery and sent him to die in prison, everyone said they'd been right all along. But those 3 throwaway kids grew up to become something nobody expected. Dangerous. Dangerous to the system that had caged their father. Dangerous to the cops who'd planted evidence. Dangerous to anyone who thought justice was just a word powerful people used to keep the powerless in line. Today, they were walking into a courtroom with proof that would free not just David, but 43 other innocent souls rotting behind bars. The police department was about to learn what happens when you try to bury the truth. Sometimes it grows roots, and sometimes those roots tear down everything you've built. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The November wind cut through Detroit's east side like a blade, carrying the smell of rust and rain. David Walker wiped his oil-stained hands on an already dirty rag, watching the last customer's taillights disappear into the gathering darkness. Another 14-hour day at the shop, another $60 in his pocket if he was lucky. The garage wasn't much to look at, a converted warehouse with peeling paint and a sign that read Walker's Auto Repair in fading red letters. But it was his, bought with sweat and determination after 5 years of working for other people. At 28, David had the kind of hands that told stories. Scarred knuckles from wrenches that slipped, a crooked index finger from a fight he wished he could forget, and calluses thick as leather. His face carried its own history. A small scar through his left eyebrow, eyes that had seen too much for someone his age, and a jaw that stayed clenched even when he smiled, which wasn't often these days. The neighborhood around his shop had been dying a slow death for years. Abandoned buildings outnumbered occupied, ones 3 to 1. Windows were either boarded up or broken, and the streetlights that still worked flickered like they were counting down to their own extinction. Crime wasn't just present, it was woven into the fabric of daily life. You learned which corners to avoid, which alleys meant trouble, and which sounds meant you should lock your door and mind your business. David was pulling down the metal security gate when he heard it, the distinctive clatter of aluminum cans hitting pavement. He turned to see 3 small figures hunched over the dumpster behind the Chinese restaurant next door. Kids. Their movements had the desperate efficiency of practiced scavengers, checking every container, every corner, missing nothing. The oldest looked about 13, tall for his age, but rail-thin, wearing a man's jacket that hung off his shoulders like a tent. He kept watch while the other 2 searched, his eyes scanning the alley with the wariness of someone who'd learned to expect trouble. The middle child, maybe 10, had found something, half a container of rice, and was scooping it into a plastic bag with his bare hands. The youngest, a girl who couldn't have been more than 8, stood slightly apart, clutching a teddy bear that had seen better days, its fur matted and one eye missing. David's first instinct was to look away. Not his problem. He had enough troubles without taking on someone else's. But something about the way the girl held that bear, pressed against her chest like it was the only solid thing in a world that kept shifting, it stopped him cold. "Hey," he called out, his voice rougher than he intended. All 3 kids froze. The oldest stepped in front of the others, his stance protective, ready to run or fight, whichever the situation demanded. "We ain't doing nothing wrong," he said, chin raised in defiance despite the fear in his eyes. "Trash is public property." David held up his hands, showing empty palms. "Didn't say you were. When's the last time you ate? I mean really ate, not just—" He gestured at the dumpster. The middle boy's stomach answered for them, a long, hollow growl that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet alley. The oldest shot him a look that said, "Traitor," but the damage was done. "Wait here," David said, then thought better of it. "Actually, come around front. It's warmer inside." He could see them weighing their options, street wisdom warring with hunger. Finally, the oldest nodded, just barely, and they followed him to the shop's entrance, maintaining a careful distance like stray dogs that had been kicked too many times. The shop's waiting area wasn't much. 3 mismatched chairs, a coffee table held together with duct tape, and a space heater that wheezed more than it warmed. But compared to the November wind, it might as well have been a palace. David grabbed his lunch bag from the mini fridge in the corner. He'd been saving half his sandwich for dinner, but looking at those hollow eyes, dinner seemed like a luxury he could afford to skip. "It's just turkey and cheese," he said, dividing the sandwich into 3 pieces. "Got some chips too," and he found a bruised apple in the bottom of the bag. The way they ate told him everything he needed to know. They tried to be polite, to eat slowly, but hunger won. The sandwich disappeared in seconds. The chips lasted maybe a minute longer. The girl bit into the apple, and her face lit up like she'd forgotten fruit could taste sweet. "What are your names?" David asked, settling into the chair across from them. The oldest hesitated, then said Khalil, "But everyone calls me Cal." He nodded at the middle boy. "That's Benji, and she's Amara. I'm David. You kids got somewhere to stay tonight." The silence that followed was answer enough. Cal's jaw tightened, pride and desperation fighting for control of his face. "We manage," he said finally. "There's a place under the highway that stays pretty dry." Under the highway. David knew exactly where he meant. A concrete cavern where the homeless gathered, where fights broke out over cardboard, where winter meant somebody wouldn't wake up every few nights. No place for kids. The shop door rattled suddenly, making everyone jump. Marcus from the corner store peered through the glass. His face creased with concern that looked more like annoyance. David let him in. "David, what you doing with these kids?" Marcus asked, eyeing them suspiciously. "You know they've been hanging around the neighborhood for weeks. They trouble, man. That one," he pointed at Benji, "I caught him trying to steal chips last Tuesday." "I wasn't stealing," Benji protested, his voice cracking. "I was just looking." Marcus snorted. "Yeah, looking with your hands in your pockets." "David, I'm telling you, don't get involved. You got a good thing going here. Don't mess it up playing hero for some runaways who probably got family looking for them." "If they had family looking for them, they wouldn't be eating out of dumpsters," David said quietly. "Not your problem," Marcus insisted. "You remember what happened to Jerome when he tried to help those kids last year? They robbed him blind, took everything that wasn't nailed down. You can't trust." "Thank you, Marcus," David cut him off, seeing Amara shrink into herself at the words. "I got handled." Marcus shook his head as he left, muttering about fools and their money. The bell above the door clanged with finality. The kids were already standing, ready to leave. They'd heard this song before, knew how it ended. But David wasn't done. "You hungry for more?" he asked. "There's a McDonald's 2 blocks over." Cal's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "What you want for it?" The question hit David like cold water. What kind of world had these kids lived in where kindness always came with a price? "Nothing," he said. "Just nobody should go to bed hungry. Especially not kids." They walked to McDonald's in silence, the kids maintaining their careful distance, ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. David ordered 3 Big Mac meals, large with apple pies for dessert. The cashier, a teenage girl with elaborate nails, gave him a knowing look like she'd seen this before. An adult with kids who clearly weren't his, paying with crumpled bills counted out carefully. They ate in a booth by the window, and slowly, carefully, the kids began to relax. Benji, it turned out, loved math, but hadn't been to school in months. Cal wanted to be a cop, which seemed ironic given their current situation. Amara didn't say much, but when David gave her the toy from his Happy Meal, he'd ordered one for himself just for this purpose. She smiled for the first time, a tiny, fragile thing that disappeared as quickly as it came. "Where are your parents?" David asked finally, gently. Cal's face went hard. "Gone," was all he said. Benji looked at the table. Amara clutched her teddy bear tighter. David didn't push. He knew about gone. His own mother had been gone since he was 15, cancer taking her piece by piece while he watched, helpless. His father had been gone even before that, lost to a bottle and eventually to the streets. He knew about being alone, about the world feeling too big and too small at the same time. Walking back to the shop, they passed a group of young men standing on the corner, their presence changing the air like a shift in barometric pressure. David recognized one of them, Terrell, who ran with the East Side Disciples. Terrell's eyes tracked them, lingering on the kids with an interest that made David's skin crawl. "Yo, Walker," Terrell called out. "Since when you running a daycare?" David kept walking, ushering the kids ahead of him. "Just helping out, Terrell. Nothing to do with you. Everything in this neighborhood got to do with me," Terrell said, but he didn't follow. Not yet. Back at the shop, David found himself at a crossroads. He could give the kids some money, maybe a blanket from his car, send them on their way, and go home to his small apartment with a clear conscience. He'd done more than most would. But looking at them huddled together on his broken couch, Amara already half asleep against Cal's shoulder, Benji trying to stay awake, but losing the battle. He knew he couldn't. "My place ain't much," he heard himself saying. "Just a one-bedroom apartment above the barber shop on Greshit. But the couch pulls out, and it's warm. You could stay tonight, get some real sleep." Cal's eyes went wide with surprise, then narrow with suspicion. "Why?" he asked. "What you really want?" The question hurt more than David wanted to admit, but he understood it. Trust was a luxury these kids couldn't afford. "I want to sleep tonight without wondering if you three froze under that highway," David said honestly. "That's all. One night. Tomorrow. We can figure out tomorrow." They stood in a tableau of uncertainty. Three kids who'd learned that adults meant danger more often than safety, and one man who'd promised himself he'd never be responsible for anyone again. Not after what happened to Marcus. His cousin Marcus, different from the store owner, who'd counted on him that night 5 years ago, who'd needed him to stay calm, to not throw that punch, to walk away from the fight. But David hadn't walked away, and Marcus had paid the price. Paralyzed from the waist down when the fight escalated, when guns came out, when everything went wrong. But these weren't those streets, and these kids weren't asking him to fight. They were just cold and hungry and alone, and sometimes the past had to make room for the present. "Okay," Cal said finally, speaking for all of them as he always did. One night. David's apartment was exactly as advertised, small, sparse, but clean. The couch did pull out, revealing a mattress that had seen better days, but was still better than concrete. He found extra blankets in the closet, a can of soup in the cabinet, some crackers that weren't too stale. The kids took turns in the bathroom, and David pretended not to notice how long they spent under the hot water, or how Benji stuffed toilet paper in his pockets, or how Amara carefully washed her teddy bear in the sink. As they settled in for the night, the three of them squeezed onto the pull-out bed like puppies in a pile. David sat in his recliner, watching them in the light from the street. They didn't trust him yet, might never fully trust anyone, but they were here, safe, warm, fed. It was a start. "Mr. David?" Amara's voice was so quiet he almost missed it. "Yeah. Thank you." 2 words, barely whispered, but they rearranged something in David's chest, something he'd thought was permanently broken. "You're welcome," he said to the darkness. Tomorrow would bring questions from neighbors, from authorities, maybe from the kids themselves. Tomorrow would bring complications he couldn't afford and responsibilities he wasn't ready for. But tonight, 3 kids who'd been invisible to the world were sleeping safely, and somehow that was enough. The morning after that first night revealed the first crack in the fragile trust David had earned. He woke to find Cal, Benji, and Amara fully dressed, shoes on, huddled by the door like they were ready to bolt. On the kitchen counter, half a loaf of bread was missing, and through the thin fabric of Benji's jacket pocket, David could see the outline of crackers he'd taken from the cabinet. "Going somewhere?" David asked, keeping his voice neutral as he started the coffee maker. Cal's chin went up, defensive. "We figured we'd head out early. Don't want to overstay." David nodded like this made perfect sense, then opened the refrigerator. "Before breakfast? I was thinking eggs. Maybe some toast, if there's any bread left." He said it without accusation, but Benji's face went red, his hand moving instinctively to his pocket. "We didn't," Cal started. "It's okay," David interrupted. "I get it. You take what you can when you can because you don't know when the next chance will come. But you don't have to steal from me. You hungry? Ask. You need something? Ask. This ain't the streets." Slowly, reluctantly, Benji pulled the crackers from his pocket and set them on the counter. From under his shirt, he produced the missing bread, slightly squashed but still in its bag. "Sorry," he mumbled. "Nothing to be sorry for," David said, cracking eggs into a bowl. Now, who wants scrambled and who wants fried? They stayed for breakfast, then lunch. Then, somehow, it was evening again, and David was pulling out the couch for the second night. He told himself it was just until he could figure out what to do, who to call. But the truth was, he didn't want to call anyone. These kids had been failed by every system designed to protect them. What made him think the next time would be different? By the end of the first week, a routine had developed. David would wake at 5, get ready quietly, leave breakfast on the counter, and head to the shop. The kids would show up around noon, after he'd had time to explain to curious customers that they were helping out, learning the trade. Cal proved to have steady hands and a good eye for detail. Benji could calculate parts costs in his head faster than David could on paper. Amara organized the waiting area, arranging the ancient magazines by date, watering the half-dead plant someone had left behind until it showed signs of green. But money was tight, tighter than before. 3 extra mouths meant his careful budget was shot. The electric bill was higher from leaving the heat on all day. His grocery bill had tripled. When Amara's shoes finally fell apart completely, held together with duct tape and hope, David did something he'd sworn he'd never do. He went to the pawn shop. The watch had been his father's, the only thing of value the man had left behind. It wasn't worth much monetarily, maybe $50 on a good day, but it was the last piece of his father that didn't hurt to look at. Mr. Peterson at the pawn shop knew the story, knew what the watch meant. "You sure about this, David?" he asked, turning the watch over in his weathered hands. "Yeah, David Leet. It's just sitting in a drawer anyway." He walked out with $60 and spent it all at the Goodwill, finding shoes that almost fit, jackets that were only a little too big, gloves without too many holes. When he gave them to the kids, Cal looked at the shoes for a long moment before saying, "These must have cost money." "Everything costs something," David said, "but some things are worth it." The neighborhood noticed, of course. In a place where everyone knew everyone's business, 3 kids suddenly living with David Walker was the kind of news that spread faster than fire. Opinions were divided and loud. Mrs. Washington from 2 doors down brought over a casserole and a smile. "Good for you, David. Those babies need somebody." But Tom Harrison from the barber shop below David's apartment had different thoughts. "You lost your mind? You don't know nothing about raising kids. And they ain't even yours. What happens when their real parents show up? Or when they rob you blind and disappear?" "Then I guess I get robbed," David said, tired of defending himself. "Won't be the first time." The real test came when David tried to enroll them in school. The secretary at Douglas Elementary looked at him over her glasses, skepticism written in every line of her face. "You're their legal guardian?" she asked. "I'm taking care of them." "That's not the same thing. We need paperwork. Birth certificates, medical records, proof of residency, custody papers." "They're kids," David said, frustration creeping into his voice. "They need to be in school." "I understand that, Mr. Walker, but there are procedures." "Procedures," David repeated. "Right. And while we're following procedures, they fall further behind." "Makes sense." He left without enrolling them, but he didn't give up. That night, he sat them down at the kitchen table with notebooks he'd bought from the dollar store and pencils sharpened with his pocket knife. "We're doing school here until I can get you into real school," he announced. "Cal, you're in what?" "8th grade. Was," Cal corrected. "Before." "Then you still are." "Benji?" "5th." Benji nodded. "And Amara, 2nd?" She whispered, "I don't know. I can't really read good." David's heart clenched, but he kept his voice steady. "Then we'll start with reading. Every night, 2 hours, homework time." They resisted at first. Cal said he was too old for school. Benji claimed math was pointless. Amara just cried silently, frustrated by letters that wouldn't stay still on the page. But David persisted, patient even when he wanted to give up, remembering his mother doing the same with him when he'd struggled in school. It was during one of these homework sessions that David's past came knocking, literally. The door shook under a heavy fist, and when David opened it, he found himself face to face with Officer Mills, a cop who'd arrested him 5 years ago after the bar fight that had changed everything. "Walker," Mills said, his tone making the name sound like an accusation. "Heard you got some kids living here. That a crime?" David asked, keeping his body in the doorway, blocking the view inside. "Depends. They runaways?" Someone filed a report about missing kids, matching their description. David's stomach dropped, but he kept his face neutral. These kids ain't missing. They're right where they're supposed to be. Mills leaned in, close enough that David could smell the coffee on his breath. You really think you're the right person to be playing daddy? With your record? My record's got nothing to do with this. Your record's got everything to do with this. Assault. Battery. 18 months in county. That's who you are, Walker. That's who you'll always be. After Mills left, David found the kids huddled in the hallway, having heard everything. Amara was crying again, but differently this time. Scared tears, not frustrated ones. You went to jail? Benji asked, his voice small. David sat on the floor, back against the wall, suddenly exhausted. Yeah, I did. What for? Cal asked, but his tone wasn't accusing, just curious. So, David told them. About the bar, about his cousin Marcus, who'd just gotten a promotion at the factory, about celebrating, about the drunk guys who wouldn't leave them alone, who'd said things David couldn't repeat to kids. About the punch he threw, about the chaos that followed, about Marcus trying to break it up, about the gun that came from nowhere, about the bullet that took Marcus's legs. I lost control, David said simply, and it cost my cousin everything. Cost me 18 months. Cost me any chance at the life I'd planned. I was going to be a teacher, you know. Had 2 years of community college done. Was saving for university. But you can't teach with a record. You can't do a lot of things with a record. Is that why you're helping us? Cal asked. To make up for it? David thought about it, really thought about it. Maybe partly, but mostly because you need help, and I can give it. That's enough of a reason, isn't it? The next day, David came home from work to find the apartment transformed. The kids had cleaned, really cleaned, not just straightened up. The floor was mopped, the windows washed, the bathroom sparkling. On the refrigerator, stuck with a magnet shaped like a banana, was a piece of paper with crayon writing, Happy Birthday, David. It ain't my birthday, David said, confused. We know, Cal said, but we don't know when your real birthday is, and we wanted to do something nice. They made a cake from a box, mix they'd found in the back of the cabinet. Probably expired, but still good enough. It was lopsided and the frosting was too thin, but when they sang Happy Birthday, their voices uncertain but trying, David had to turn away for a moment, ostensibly to get plates, but really to wipe his eyes. That night, after the kids were asleep, David sat in his recliner and watched them again. The pull-out couch was getting too small. Cal's feet hung off the end, and Benji talked in his sleep, keeping the others awake. They needed more space, better arrangements. They needed a real home. But this was a real home, wasn't it? Not the apartment. That was just walls and a roof. But this thing they were building together, carefully day by day, meal by meal, homework session by homework session. It was fragile and maybe temporary, but it was real. A week later, the first real crisis hit. David woke at 2 in the morning to find Cal's spot on the pull-out empty. The window open, cold air streaming in. Panic shot through him as he woke Benji. Where's your brother? He ain't my brother, Benji said automatically, then saw David's face. I don't know. He was here when we went to sleep. David threw on his jacket and shoes, told Benji to lock the door behind him and not open it for anyone except him or Cal, and hit the streets. He knew where to look, the corners where the dealers stood, the alleys where quick money changed hands, the places where boys became men too fast and for all the wrong reasons. He found Cal 3 blocks away, standing with Terrell and 2 other members of the East Side Disciples. Money was changing hands, and Cal was reaching for it when David's voice cut through the night. Cal! Everyone turned. Terrell smiled, gold teeth catching the streetlight. Look who it is. Daddy David come to collect his boy. I ain't his boy, Cal said, but his voice wavered. No, David asked. Then what are you doing out here? Getting money, Cal said defiantly. Real money, not charity. That ain't money, David said, pointing at the bills in Terrell's hand. That's a chain. First link is light, easy to carry. But every link after gets heavier, until you can't move, can't breathe, can't be nothing but what the chain makes you. Listen to the preacher, Terrell laughed. You forget where you came from, Walker. You forget who you used to run with. No, David said. I remember everything. That's why I'm here. He walked straight up to Cal, ignoring Terrell, ignoring the danger, ignoring everything but the boy who was trying so hard to look tough and failing. You want to be out here? Fine. But you look at me first. You look at me and tell me this is what you want. Not the money, the life. The looking over your shoulder. The wondering if today's the day someone decides you're in the way. The knowing that everybody you care about becomes a target. You want that. Cal's facade cracked. I just wanted to help. Food costs money. Clothes cost money. Everything costs money, and you ain't got it. So you were doing this for me? For us, Cal corrected. For all of us. David put his hand on Cal's shoulder, felt the boy trembling under the tough exterior. We don't need money that comes with blood on it. We'll figure out together, but not like this. Never like this. Terrell stepped forward. Boy wants to earn. Let him earn. David turned to face him fully. He's 13. So? I was 12 when I started. And look how that turned out, David said quietly. The insult hung in the air, dangerous, electric. Terrell's hand moved to his waistband, where everyone knew he kept his peace. But David didn't flinch, didn't move, just stood there between Cal and the life that wanted to claim him. This ain't over, Terrell said finally. It is for tonight, David replied. The walk home was silent until they were a block away from the apartment. Then Cal said, I'm sorry. I know. I don't want to be a burden. David stopped walking, turned to face him. You're not a burden. You're a kid. You're supposed to worry about homework and girls and whether the Pistons are going to make the playoffs. Not about paying bills. But, no buts. That's my job. Your job is to be 13. Can you do that? Cal nodded, and for the first time since David had met him, he looked his age, young, scared, trying to navigate a world that had forced him to grow up too fast. When they got back to the apartment, Benji and Amara were awake, worried. Without a word, they made room for Cal on the pull-out, and the four of them sat together in the dark until the sun came up, a family forged not by blood but by choice, by struggle, by the simple act of staying when leaving would have been easier. The next morning, David made a decision. He couldn't keep them in his one-bedroom apartment forever, but he couldn't let them go either. So he did the only thing that made sense. He started looking for a house. Not to buy. He'd never have that kind of money. But to rent. Something with bedrooms, plural. Something with a yard. Maybe something that could be a real home. It would mean working more hours, taking on jobs he usually turned down because they didn't pay enough or were too far away. It would mean sacrificing what little free time he had, giving up any chance at a social life, at dating, at being 28 and unattached. But looking at the three kids eating breakfast at his too small table, arguing about whether Superman could beat Batman in a fight, being kids for just a moment, he knew it was worth it. Why you smiling? Amara asked, syrup on her chin. Just thinking about the future, David said. What's it look like? Benji asked. David thought about it. Like this, he said finally. Just like this, only better. And for the first time in 5 years, since that night at the bar when everything went wrong, David Walker felt something he'd thought was lost forever. Hope. It wasn't much, fragile as the morning light streaming through the window, but it was there, growing stronger with each passing day, each shared meal, each moment that proved that families weren't just born. Sometimes, if you were lucky, they were built. 3 months had passed since that cold November night when David first brought the kids home. February in Detroit was brutal, but the small house on Chalmers Street that David had managed to rent was warm. It wasn't much, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that leaked when it rained, but it had a yard where Amara could play and enough space that they weren't tripping over each other every morning. The knock on the door at 6 in the morning wasn't polite. It was the kind of knock that meant authority, that meant trouble, that meant your past had finally caught up with you. David opened the door to find 4 police officers, hands on their weapons, faces hard. David Walker, the lead officer asked, though they clearly knew who he was. Yeah, we need to search your residence. There's been a series of break-ins in the neighborhood. Your name came up. My name always comes up, David said, but he stepped aside. He knew better than to resist. That's how people like him ended up dead, and he had 3 kids depending on him now. The search was thorough and destructive. They pulled out drawers, dumped them on the floor. They ripped cushions off the couch, tore through the kids' carefully organized school supplies. Cal stood in the doorway of the bedroom he shared with Benji, fists clenched, watching them destroy what little they had. "This is wrong," Cal said, his voice shaking with rage. "He didn't do nothing." One of the officers, a young guy who looked fresh out of the academy, laughed. "Yeah? How would you know? You his lookout." "I'm his son," Cal said, and the word hung in the air like a challenge. David's heart stopped for a moment. So, Cal had never called him dad, never called himself David's son. But here, now, facing down cops who saw David as nothing but an ex-con, Cal claimed him. "Funny," Officer Mills said, appearing in the doorway like a bad dream. "Records don't show Walker having any kids." "Records don't show a lot of things," Benji said from behind Cal, his voice steadier than David had ever heard it. "Don't mean they ain't true." Mills walked over to David, got close enough that David could see the broken blood vessels in his eyes, smell the stale cigarettes on his uniform. "You think you're smart, Walker? Playing house with these strays? I know what you're really doing. Using them as cover, making them run your packages, keeping your hands clean while they do the dirty work." "That's not," David started. "Save it," Mills interrupted. "We're watching you. One mistake, just one, and I'll have you back in a cell so fast your head will spin. And these kids? They'll be in the system before you can say foster care. They left eventually, finding nothing because there was nothing to find. But the damage was done. The house looked like a tornado had hit it. Amara was crying silently, clutching her teddy bear. The neighbors were all at their windows, watching, judging, remembering why they'd been suspicious of David Walker in the first place. "We'll clean it up," David said, trying to sound confident. "It's just stuff. We're okay." But they weren't okay. The next day at school, David had finally managed to get them enrolled after weeks of paperwork and bureaucracy. The whispers started. Kids could be cruel, and they'd heard from their parents about the police raid. "Your dad's a criminal," someone said to Benji at lunch. "Heard you're all homeless trash," another kid told Amara. Cal got in 3 fights in 1 week, defending David's name, defending their makeshift family. The third fight ended with a bloody nose and a suspension letter that David had to sign, sitting in the principal's office like he was the one in trouble. "Mr. Walker," Principal Thompson said, her voice carefully neutral, "I understand your situation is complicated, but we can't have violence in our school." "Kid's defending his family," David said. "Maybe you should ask why he feels like he needs to." "Are you suggesting our school has a bullying problem?" "I'm suggesting that when cops raid someone's house for no reason, and everyone knows about it, maybe the adults should step in before the kids have to handle it themselves." Principal Thompson's expression softened slightly. "You're right. I'll speak to the teachers." But Cal still has to serve his suspension. Walking out of the school, David found Mrs. Patterson waiting by his truck. She taught 5th grade science, had Benji in her class, and, unlike most of the staff, she looked at David like he was human. "Mr. Walker," she said, "I wanted you to know that Benji is exceptional. His understanding of mathematics and science is years beyond grade level." "He's smart," David agreed. "He's more than smart. He's gifted. There's a program at the university for exceptional students. Full scholarship, advanced courses, real opportunities. I'd like to recommend him." David felt pride swell in his chest, then crash against reality. "What's it cost?" "The program is free, but there are fees, transportation, materials, uniforms. Maybe $300 total." $300 might as well have been $3,000. But David nodded anyway. "Send me the information. We'll figure it out." That night, while the kids did homework at the kitchen table, someone spray-painted snitch across their front door. David discovered it when he went to check the mail. Red paint, still dripping, visible from the street. He could hear Terrell's crew laughing from the corner, watching to see what he'd do. David got the paint remover from under the sink and started scrubbing. Cal joined him, then Benji, then even little Amara with a rag almost as big as she was. They worked in silence, but it was a comfortable silence, a together silence. "Why they call you a snitch?" Amara asked eventually. "Because they're scared," David said. "Of what?" "Of someone proving you don't have to be what they are to survive here." The next morning, the windows were broken. 3 rocks, 3 windows, precision strikes. David boarded them up with plywood, told the kids it was temporary, but everyone knew that plywood windows in this neighborhood were rarely temporary. Then came the night that changed everything. David had worked late, a transmission job that ran over, and he was walking home when he saw the flames. The corner store, Marcus's shop, was on fire. Without thinking, David ran toward it, found Marcus trapped behind the security gate, the lock jammed. "Get back!" David yelled to the gathering crowd, then grabbed the gate with both hands and pulled. The metal was hot, getting hotter, and he could smell his palms burning, but he didn't let go. Years of working with tools had given him strength, and desperation gave him more. The gate bent, buckled, and finally snapped. David dragged Marcus out just as the fire department arrived. The paramedics treated them both, Marcus for smoke inhalation, David for second-degree burns on his hands and arms. The crowd that had gathered was murmuring, and for once, it wasn't negative. David Walker, the ex-con everyone suspected, had risked his life to save someone who'd badmouth him to anyone who'd listen. "Why?" Marcus asked from his stretcher. "After everything I said?" "Because it was the right thing to do," David said simply. The story made the local news. Local mechanic saved store owner for blaze. Suddenly, David wasn't just the ex-con with questionable kids. He was a hero, at least for a few days. Business at the shop picked up. People who'd avoided him now brought their cars in. Mrs. Washington from the old apartment building brought a casserole and an apology. But good news in the neighborhood was like blood in the water. It attracted sharks. 2 nights after the fire, the police were back. This time, they had a warrant. Someone had robbed a liquor store 6 blocks away, and an anonymous tip had placed David at the scene. "I was at the shop," David said. "Check the security footage." "Conveniently, your shop's cameras weren't working that night," Mills said with a smile that said he knew exactly why that was convenient. They arrested him in front of the kids. Amara screamed, Benji froze, and Cal tried to physically stop them, earning himself a shove that sent him sprawling. "Call Mrs. Patterson," David managed to say as they cuffed him. "She'll help with the kids." The last thing he saw was their faces, scared, angry, but most of all disappointed. Like everyone who'd ever promised to stay had lied, and now David was just another liar in a long line of them. The charges were dropped 2 days later when the actual robber was caught 3 towns over, but the damage was done. Child services showed up the day David got home, a tired-looking woman with a clipboard and no smile. "Mr. Walker, we've received several complaints about the children in your care." "They're fine," David said, exhausted from 2 nights in holding, hands still bandaged from the fire. "That's for us to determine. Are you their legal guardian?" "I'm working on it." Working on it isn't the same as being it. These children need proper care. They have proper care. The woman looked around the house, at the boarded windows, the patched couch, the obvious signs of poverty, and made a note. "We'll be monitoring the situation. Any further police involvement, and we'll have to remove the children for their own safety." After she left, David found Cal packing a bag. "Where are you going?" David asked. "Away," Cal said. "We're trouble for you. The cops, the gangs, everybody's on you because of us." "No," David said firmly. "They're on me because of me, because of who I was, what I did. You 3 are the only good thing in my life. You're not trouble. You're the reason I get up in the morning. But if you weren't here, I'd just be an ex-con mechanic counting days until I died. With you here, I'm something else. I'm trying to be something else." Cal dropped the bag, and for the first time, this tough 13-year-old who'd survived the streets, who'd protected his siblings through things no kid should have to protect anyone from, started to cry. David pulled him into a hug, and Cal let him, sobbing into his shoulder while Benji and Amara joined them. For people holding each other up in a world that seemed determined to knock them down. 5 years had passed since that night. They'd held each other and promised to stay together. The kids were teenagers now. Cal 18 and technically aged out of the system, but still living at home. Benji 15 and accepted into that university program Mrs. Patterson had recommended. Amara 13 and showing signs of becoming an artist, her sketches covering every available wall space. David was 33 now, looking older, working 2 jobs to keep them afloat. Days at the shop, nights at a warehouse loading trucks. His hands were permanently stained with oil and his back ached constantly, but they were making it. Barely, but making it. The morning of October 15th started like any other. David left for the shop at 5:30. Cal was getting ready for his job at the grocery store. Benji was already at his desk studying for an advanced placement exam, and Amara was asleep. Not a morning person, even on good days. David had just opened the shop when Mrs. Patterson called. David turned on the news. The breaking story was about a robbery at Klein's convenience store, 3 blocks from David's shop. The elderly owner, Mr. Klein, had been beaten, was in critical condition. The police were looking for suspects. "Why are you calling me about this?" David asked, though a cold dread was already settling in his stomach. "Because they're showing security footage, and David, there's someone who looks like you near the scene." David's blood went cold. He hadn't been anywhere near Klein's yesterday. He'd been at the shop until 6, then straight home for dinner, helping Amara with her art project until 11. But he knew how this would look. Ex-con, financial troubles, spotted near a crime scene. The story wrote itself. He was right. By noon, the police were at his shop. Mills was there, of course, looking like Christmas had come early. "Walker, we need you to come answer some questions." "Am I under arrest?" "Not yet, but you will be if you don't cooperate." David went. What choice did he have? At the station, they showed him the footage, a grainy image of a man in a dark hoodie, about David's height and build, walking past Klein's an hour before the robbery. "That's not me," David said. "Looks like you." "Lots of people look like me from a distance in bad footage." "Maybe. But then there's this." Mills produced an evidence bag containing a wrench, David's wrench, with DW scratched into the handle, something he did to all his tools to prevent theft. "Found this at the scene." "That's impossible. All my tools are at the shop." "Are they? You sure you didn't drop this while you were beating an old man for his cash register?" "I was home. The kids can verify." "The kids you've trained to lie for you?" Mills leaned back, satisfied. "We also have a witness who saw you arguing with Klein last week about him shortchanging you." David remembered that. Klein had given him the wrong change, a simple mistake, and David had pointed it out. They'd laughed about it, Klein joking about his failing eyesight. But taken out of context, twisted the right way. "I want a lawyer," David said. "Sure," Mills said. "But lawyers cost money, don't they? And we both know you don't have any." They kept him for 48 hours before officially charging him. During that time, the story exploded. Ex-con attacks elderly store owner. Previous hero revealed as violent criminal. The same news that had praised him for saving Marcus now painted him as a monster who'd fooled everyone. The public defender they assigned him was 25, fresh out of law school, and overwhelmed. "The evidence is circumstantial," she said. "But with your record, I didn't do this." "I believe you," she said, though David wasn't sure she did. "But the jury won't. You're looking at 20 to life if we go to trial and lose. They're offering 10 if you plead." "I'm not pleading to something I didn't do." The trial was a disaster from the start. The prosecution painted David as a career criminal who'd used taking in homeless kids as a cover for his continued criminal activity. They brought up his assault conviction. The bar fight made it sound like violence was in his nature. "Mr. Walker has fooled this community once," the prosecutor said in his opening statement. "Don't let him fool you again." David's lawyer tried. She pointed out the lack of physical evidence, the fact that the wrench could have been planted, that the footage was inconclusive. But then the prosecution brought out their star witness, a local drug dealer named Raymond, who claimed David had approached him about hitting Klein's place, that David had been desperate for money. He said the old man kept cash in the back, Raymond testified. Said it would be easy. It was a lie, every word of it, but Raymond sold it well. David found out later that Raymond had been facing his 3rd strike on drug charges, but those charges mysteriously disappeared after his testimony. The kids testified for the defense. Cal, trying to look older in his borrowed suit, told the jury about the man who'd saved them, who'd worked himself to the bone to provide for them. Benji presented a detailed timeline of David's whereabouts, complete with receipts and phone records. Amara, voice shaking, showed the art project they'd worked on together that night, time-stamped photos from her phone. But the prosecution twisted even that. "These children are loyal to Mr. Walker," they said. "Of course they'd lie for him. He's all they have." The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they came back, David knew from their faces what the verdict would be. Guilty. The word hit him like a physical blow. Behind him, he heard Amara sob, heard Cal curse, heard Benji's sharp intake of breath. The sentencing was worse. The judge, known for being harsh on repeat offenders, gave him life with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Mr. Walker, the judge said, you were given a second chance after your first conviction. You squandered it. Society cannot tolerate violent men who prey on the elderly. This sentence reflects the seriousness of your crime and the need to protect the community from individuals like you. As the bailiffs prepared to take him away, David turned to the kids one last time. They were being held back by court officers, but he could see their faces clearly, devastated, lost, angry at a world that had just proved every cynical thought they'd ever had about justice. Be better than me, David said, voice cracking. Live free. Don't let this define you. We'll get you out, Cal shouted. We'll prove you're innocent. But David was already being led away, the chains on his wrists and ankles clanking with each step. The last thing he saw was Mills standing in the back of the courtroom, smiling. The kids were split up within a week. Cal, being 18, was on his own. He dropped out of community college, got a second job, tried to get custody of Benji and Amara, but no judge was going to give two minors to an 18-year-old with no real income. Benji was placed with a foster family in the suburbs who valued his intelligence but didn't understand his anger. Amara went to a group home where her art supplies were confiscated as potential weapons. They tried to stay in touch, but the system wasn't designed for that. Different schools, different cities, eventually different lives, pulling them in different directions. The promise they'd made to David, to be better, to live free, seemed impossible when every day was just about surviving without each other. David, meanwhile, entered the state prison system as a lifer. His first cellmate told him to forget about the outside world, that hoping for anything would drive him crazy. But every night, David looked at the photo Amara had drawn for him, a sketch of the four of them at that community picnic years ago, the one time they'd all been happy together, and refused to forget. He wrote letters to the kids that were returned unopened, the foster system redirecting mail to protect the minors' new addresses. He applied for appeals that were denied. He worked in the prison library, taught himself law, filed motion after motion, but nothing changed. Klein recovered, but couldn't identify his attacker. The real perpetrator was never caught. Raymond disappeared shortly after the trial. Word on the street was he'd gotten a new identity and a fresh start courtesy of some very grateful cops. Mills got a commendation for closing a high-profile case. 10 years passed, then 15, then 20. David became an old man in prison, his hair gray, his hands arthritic from years of prison labor. He'd stopped hoping for release, stopped believing in justice, stopped everything except existing. The photo Amara had drawn was faded now, worn from handling, but he still looked at it every night. He didn't know that Cal had become a cop, working his way up to detective, driven by a need to be inside the system that had failed them. He didn't know that Benji had become a journalist, specializing in criminal justice and wrongful convictions, his anger channeled into exposing corruption. He didn't know that Amara had become a therapist, helping kids who'd been through trauma, her art now a tool for healing. He didn't know they'd never stopped looking for a way to free him. On the 25th anniversary of his conviction, David was called to the warden's office. He assumed it was about his parole hearing, another denial probably. But when he walked in, he saw three people he barely recognized. Cal in a detective shield, Benji in an expensive suit, Amara in professional attire. All of them successful. All of them here. We found it, Cal said without preamble. The evidence that proves you're innocent. David sank into a chair, legs suddenly unable to hold him. What? Raymond left a recording before he died, Benji explained. A confession. Names, dates, everything. Including who really robbed Klein's and who paid him to lie about you. Mills is already in custody, Cal added with grim satisfaction. Turns out you weren't the only one he framed. We've got 8 other cases so far. The conviction's being vacated, Amara said, tears streaming down her face. You're coming home, David. You're finally coming home. David looked at them, his kids, not kids anymore, but the family he'd chosen and who'd chosen him back. and for the first time in 25 years, he smiled. A real smile, not the prison smile that was just about surviving another day, but a smile that came from hope, from love, from the knowledge that sometimes, against all odds, justice could prevail. "You did it," he whispered. "You three actually did it." "No," Cal said firmly. "We did it. The four of us. You kept us together, even from in here. Every value you taught us, every lesson about standing up for what's right, every moment you showed us what family really means, that's what got us here." As they let him out of the prison, David thought about that promise he'd made them 25 years ago, to never abandon them. He'd kept it, even from behind bars. And they kept their promise too, to be better, to live free. They'd just interpreted it differently than he'd expected. They decided that living free meant freeing him, that being better meant fighting a system that crushed people like them. Walking into the sunlight, David Walker wasn't just a free man. He was a father, proven not by blood, but by the incredible adults standing beside him, living proof that love could survive anything, even a life sentence. The true crime podcast, Wrongful, was playing in 3 different locations across Michigan that gray Monday morning. The host's voice echoed through a Detroit police precinct, a newsroom in Ann Arbor, and a therapy clinic in Grand Rapids. Today marks 25 years since David Walker was sentenced to life in prison for the brutal robbery of Klein's convenience store. Walker, who had taken in 3 homeless children, was convicted on circumstantial evidence and the testimony of a witness who has since disappeared. But was justice really served? New questions are emerging. Detective Khalil Jones, he'd changed his last name when he aged out of foster care, not wanting questions about his past, turned off the podcast and stared at the photo tucked behind his computer monitor. The community picnic picture was creased and faded, but David's smile was still visible. Cal was 38 now, built solid from years of physical training, his face carrying the weight of too many crime scenes, too many lies, too many times he'd seen the system fail people who looked like him. "Jones, you coming to the briefing?" his partner called out. "In a minute," Cal replied, his eyes catching on another photo. This one of Detective Mills receiving a commendation 20 years ago. Mills had retired with full honors 5 years back, was living in Florida now, playing golf and collecting his pension. The thought made Cal's jaw clench. 200 miles away, Benjamin Hayes, Benji had also changed his name, wanting to sound more professional, sat in his cubicle at the Michigan Gazette, surrounded by boxes of documents, all related to wrongful convictions in Detroit between 1995 and 2005. At 35, he'd built a reputation as someone who dug where others wouldn't, who saw patterns where others saw coincidence. His editor called him obsessive. His therapist called him driven by unresolved trauma. Benji called it keeping a promise. His computer screen showed a folder labeled "David, do not open." He'd created it 10 years ago, filling it with every piece of information about David's case he could find. He opened it at least once a week, despite the name, looking for something he'd missed, some thread he hadn't pulled. In Grand Rapids, Amara Williams, she kept her foster family's name. One of the few good things from those homes was finishing a session with a teenage boy whose brother had just been arrested. At 33, she'd become everything her trauma had shaped her to be: a listener, a healer, someone who understood that sometimes the system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as designed, just not for people like them. "My brother didn't do it," the boy was saying, tears streaming down his face. "But they got witness, some junkie who says he saw him there." The words triggered something in Amara, a memory she'd buried deep. Not the trial. She remembered that clearly, the way they'd painted David as a monster, but something from before. The night of the robbery. A sound she'd heard while half asleep. Metal hitting concrete. A voice saying, "Make it fit." Her phone buzzed. A voicemail from an unknown number. She almost deleted it, probably spam, but something made her listen. The voice was weak, raspy, like someone struggling to breathe. "My name is Raymond Coulter. I lied in court about David Walker 25 years ago. They told me which man to point at. Mills, he said they'd drop my charges if I... God forgive me, I lied. That man is innocent. I'm dying now, pancreatic cancer, and I can't take this to my grave. Someone needs to know. David Walker never robbed nobody." Amara's hands shook as she saved the message, forwarded it immediately to her phone's cloud storage, then called Benji. "You need to hear this," she said without preamble. Benji listened to the recording 3 times, his investigative mind already working. "We need to verify this is really Raymond. I can match voice patterns from the trial recordings. But Amara, if this is real, we need Cal," she said. They hadn't all been in the same room in 5 years. Life had pulled them in different directions. Cal buried in police work, Benji chasing stories across the state, Amara building her practice. But within 6 hours of that voicemail, they were sitting in a diner halfway between their cities, the recording playing on Amara's phone between coffee cups and untouched pie. "It's him," Benji confirmed. "I've analyzed the voice patterns. This is Raymond Coulter. The metadata shows it was recorded at Mercy Hospital in Ohio 3 days ago." "Is he still alive?" Cal asked, already thinking like a cop. "Died yesterday," Benji said. "I checked, but he left more than just this recording. His son contacted me after I called the hospital. Raymond left a written statement too, notarized with details." Cal leaned back, processing. This is good, but it's not enough. A deathbed confession from a convicted criminal? Defense attorneys will say he was delirious, on pain meds, not reliable. "So we need more," Amara said. "We need to prove not just that Raymond lied, but why. Who made him lie?" "Mills," all 3 said simultaneously. "I've been tracking Mills's old cases," Cal admitted. Quietly, carefully, there's a pattern. Witnesses who suddenly appear, evidence that conveniently shows up, confessions that don't match the psychological profiles. David wasn't the only one. "How many?" Benji asked. "At least 8 that I can prove. Maybe more." They sat in silence, the weight of it settling over them. 8 innocent people. 8 lives destroyed. And that was just what Cal could prove. "We do this. We're taking on the entire Detroit police establishment," Cal said. "Mills has friends, protégés, people who learn from him. My career will be over." "You care about your career more than David?" Amara asked, but her tone was gentle, understanding. "No," Cal said firmly. "I became a cop because of David. To be what the system should have been for him. If I have to burn it all down to get him out, then that's what I do." "I've got 2 weeks of vacation saved," Benji said. "My editor owes me favors. I can make this my full focus. I can work remotely," Amara added. "My clients will understand." They spent the next 3 hours planning. Cal would use his access to pull old evidence files, looking for inconsistencies. Benji would track down witnesses from the original trial, see if anyone else was ready to recant. Amara would reach out to legal aid organizations, find lawyers who specialized in wrongful convictions. The first break came from an unexpected source. Cal was reviewing evidence logs when he noticed something. The wrench that had been found at Klein's store, the one with David's initials, had been logged into evidence 6 hours after David was already in custody. The timestamp had been altered in the official report, but the original intake form, buried in a box of miscellaneous paperwork, showed the truth. They planted it after Cal told the others over video call, after they'd already arrested him. Meanwhile, Benji had found something even more damaging. Using FOIA requests and some creative investigation, he'd uncovered financial records showing large deposits into Raymond's girlfriend's account the week after his testimony. The deposits traced back to a police union slush fund that was supposedly for community outreach. They paid him, Benji said, $10,000 to lie on the stand. Amara's contribution came from her memory, finally fully unlocked. She remembered that night, clearly now. She'd woken up to use the bathroom and had looked out the window. She'd seen a police car parked outside, before the robbery was even reported. She'd seen someone throw something under David's truck. The wrench, she realized now. "I was 8, she said. "I didn't understand what I was seeing, but I remember the unit number on the car. 4418. Cal checked. Unit 4418 had been assigned to Officer Mills in 2000. They took their evidence to Priya Patel, a lawyer who'd made her name overturning wrongful convictions. She reviewed everything with the intensity of someone who'd seen too many innocent people behind bars. "This is good," she said. "Very good. But we need something ironclad. Mills will have expensive lawyers. The police union will back him. We need something that can't be explained away. That something came from Samuel King, of all people. Once a gang fixer, now a pastor-councilman, King had built his political career on being tough on crime. But Benji's investigation had uncovered a connection. King's rise to power had coincided with a spike in convictions in his district, convictions that helped him claim he was cleaning up the streets. He was in on it, Benji explained to the others. Mills would arrest someone, Raymond or another witness would testify. King would take credit for making the neighborhood safer. Everyone won except the innocent people they locked up. They needed King to talk, but he had no reason to. Until Cal remembered something from his gang days, back when he'd almost joined Terrell's crew. King had a nephew who'd been killed in a drive-by meant for someone else. The killer had never been caught, but the streets knew who'd done it. And Cal knew that King had always suspected Mills had buried the investigation because the killer was one of his informants. We offer him a trade, Cal suggested. The truth about his nephew for the truth about David. It was morally gray, maybe even wrong, but they were past caring about playing by rules that had been rigged against them from the start. The meeting with King happened in his church. After hours, the crosses on the wall seeming to judge them all. King had aged poorly, his past written in the lines on his face, his hands shaking slightly as he held the file Cal had brought. "This is about Marcus King?" he asked, looking at his nephew's crime scene photos. "Your nephew deserved justice," Cal said. "So does David Walker." King was quiet for a long moment. Then he opened his desk drawer and pulled out a ledger, its pages yellow with age. "I kept records," he said quietly. "Insurance, I called it. Every payment, every deal, every frame job. It's all here. Names, dates, amounts." "Why?" Amara asked. "Because I knew eventually the devil would come to collect," King said. "Might as well be today." The ledger was devastating. It detailed years of corruption, dozens of cases where evidence was planted, witnesses were paid, innocent people were convicted to boost arrest numbers and justify increased police funding. David's case was there, with a note. Walker, clean background, no gang ties, perfect target. Mills handles personally. With King's ledger and Raymond's confession, Priya Patel filed a motion for post-conviction relief based on newly discovered evidence. The filing was explosive enough that the Michigan Attorney General's office immediately opened an investigation. Within days, FBI agents were in Detroit, interviewing witnesses, pulling files, following the money trail that Benji had uncovered. Mills was in Florida when they came for him. Cal watched the arrest on a live stream someone had posted, feeling a satisfaction so deep it almost scared him. Mills in handcuffs, being led to a federal vehicle, his face no longer smug but scared. He looked old, fragile, nothing like the monster who'd terrorized their family for decades. But Mills wasn't going down alone. His lawyer, paid for by the police union, immediately started making deals. Names were named. Other cops who'd been involved, prosecutors who'd looked the other way, judges who'd been suspiciously harsh on certain defendants. The corruption ran deep, a cancer that had metastasized through the entire system. Cal's precinct turned on him overnight. His desk was vandalized, his cases were mysteriously reassigned. His partner requested a transfer. The blue wall of silence became a blue wall of hostility. But Cal didn't care. He'd found David's innocence. Nothing else mattered. Benji's investigation became a series in the Michigan Gazette, then got picked up nationally. The Detroit Frame-Up: How Police Corrupted Justice for Decades. He appeared on news shows, podcasts, anywhere that would let him tell David's story. The public pressure mounted, demanding not just David's release, but a review of every case Mills had touched. Amara worked with the families of other victims, providing free therapy, helping them process the trauma of having loved ones wrongfully imprisoned. She started a support group that met in the basement of King's church, a circle of pain that slowly became a circle of healing. The evidentiary hearing was set for November 15th, almost exactly 25 years after David had first brought 3 homeless kids home. The courtroom was packed. Media, community members, other families hoping their cases would be reviewed next. David was brought in wearing prison grays, his hands cuffed, his movements slow. 25 years of prison had aged him beyond his 58 years. His hair was completely gray, his shoulders stooped, his eyes carrying the weight of decades of injustice. But when he saw Cal, Benji, and Amara in the front row, something in his face changed. A light that prison hadn't managed to extinguish flickered back to life. Priya presented the evidence methodically. The ledger, authenticated by handwriting experts. Raymond's confession, both audio and written. The original evidence logs showing the wrench was planted. Financial records of payments to witnesses. Mills's own confession, given in exchange for a reduced federal sentence. The prosecution, what was left of it after the Attorney General's office had cleaned house, didn't even try to defend the original conviction. They simply asked for time to review the evidence. Your Honor, Priya said, my client has been in prison for 25 years for a crime he didn't commit. Every day he spends there while the state reviews evidence of his innocence is another day of injustice. We asked for immediate release. The judge, a newer appointment who had no connection to the old regime, looked at David. Mr. Walker, I've reviewed the evidence presented. It is clear to this court that a grave injustice has been done. Not just procedural errors, but deliberate, malicious prosecution of an innocent man. She paused, seemed to be fighting for composure. I cannot give you back 25 years. I cannot undo the damage done to you and your family. But I can do this. The conviction is vacated. The charges are dismissed with prejudice. Mr. Walker, you are free to go. The courtroom erupted. People crying, applauding, some shouting about other cases that needed review. But David heard none of it. He was looking at his kids, his 3 kids who weren't kids anymore, who'd fought the entire system to free him. The bailiff removed his handcuffs, and for the first time in 25 years, David Walker was a free man. He stood slowly, uncertainly, like he'd forgotten how to move without chains. Then Amara was running toward him, throwing herself into his arms, sobbing. Benji followed, then Cal, and suddenly they were all holding each other in the middle of the courtroom. For people who'd been family when the world said they couldn't be, who'd stayed family even when walls and years and systems tried to tear them apart. You did it, David whispered, his voice hoarse. You actually did it. We did it, Cal corrected, echoing what he'd said in the prison. All 4 of us. Together. Outside the courthouse, the media waited. David stood at the microphones, his kids, he'd always think of them as his kids, beside him. He could have been angry, could have raged about the years stolen, the life destroyed. Instead, he said, 25 years ago, I took in 3 homeless children. People said I was crazy, that they'd bring me nothing but trouble. They were wrong. These 3 brought me purpose, brought me love, brought me a reason to survive when surviving seemed impossible. They didn't just free me from prison. They freed me from the man I might have become without them. The system failed us, but we didn't fail each other. That's the victory here. The investigation that followed was massive. 37 convictions were overturned. Mills got 15 years federal time for civil rights violations. Other cops got lesser sentences or lost their pensions. King turned state's evidence and got probation, using his position to push for police reform that actually meant something. The city settled David's wrongful conviction lawsuit for $8 million. He could have taken the money and disappeared, started fresh somewhere nobody knew his story. Instead, he used it to buy a building in the old neighborhood, turning it into the Live Free Center, a place offering legal aid, counseling, and support for families dealing with the justice system. On the 1-year anniversary of his release, David stood in the center's main room, watching Cal teach a seminar on knowing your rights. Benji run a workshop on documenting police encounters. Amara lead a support group for children of incarcerated parents. The walls were covered with photos, David and the kids at that community picnic, but also dozens of other families they'd helped, other injustices they'd corrected, other lives they'd changed. Mrs. Patterson, now in her 70s, had come for the anniversary celebration. I always knew you were innocent, she told David. But more than that, I knew those children would grow up to be extraordinary. You gave them that. No, David said, watching his family work. They gave it to themselves. I just gave them place to grow. That night, after everyone had gone home, the 4 of them sat in David's office, sharing Chinese takeout like they had so many years ago. They were different people now, scarred, shaped by trauma and triumph, carrying the weight of what they'd been through. But they were still family. What now? Benji asked. David looked at each of them. Cal, who'd sacrificed his career to find the truth. Benji, who'd turned his pain into purpose. Amara, who'd made healing others her life's work. Now we keep going, David said. We keep fighting for people like us. We keep proving that family isn't about blood or papers or what the system says. It's about choosing each other again and again, no matter what. Outside, Detroit sprawled beneath the night sky, still broken in many ways, still struggling with poverty and crime and systemic injustice. But in this building, in this room, for people who'd been written off by society had rewritten their own story. They'd taken a life sentence and turned it into a life's work. The photo from the community picnic sat on David's desk, no longer hidden, no longer a painful reminder of what was lost, but a promise of what could be built when people refused to give up on each other. Next to it sat a new photo, the four of them at David's release, older, wearier, but still together. Still family. Still free. The Live Free Center had been open for 6 months when the real fight began. David had thought that his exoneration would be the end of the story, but he'd learned that the system didn't give up its victims easily. Every overturned conviction was a threat to someone's career, someone's reputation, someone's pension. And those someones were fighting back. The first sign of trouble came through Cal. He'd been working as a private investigator since leaving the force, helping Priya Patel's team review cases. But his former colleagues hadn't forgotten his betrayal of the Blue Code. They keyed your car again? David asked, looking at the deep scratches that spelled out snitch across Cal's hood. Third time this month, Cal said, trying to sound casual. Good thing I kept the beat-up Crown Vic instead of buying something nice. But it wasn't just property damage. Cal had been pulled over 17 times in the past month, always for routine checks. His apartment had been burglarized while he was at the center, though nothing valuable was taken. Just a message that they could get to him whenever they wanted. Benji was facing his own battles. His editor at the Michigan Gazette had been getting pressure from advertisers, many of whom had connections to the police union. His investigative series on wrongful convictions had been suddenly canceled, replaced with more positive community stories. They're trying to bury us, Benji said during one of their strategy meetings. Make the story go away. Make us go away. Amara had been reported to the state licensing board 3 times for unprofessional conduct. Anonymous complaints that she was using her practice to pursue a political agenda. Each complaint required hours of documentation to refute, time away from actually helping people. But the real escalation came when they took on the case of Marcus Thompson, no relation to the principal from years ago. Marcus was 17, serving life without parole for a murder committed when he was 14. The evidence was thin, a coerced confession and a witness who'd since recanted. It had all the hallmarks of a Mills frame job. David had met Marcus during a prison visit program he'd started, going back to the place he'd spent 25 years to help others who claimed innocence. Marcus reminded him of Cal at that age. Tough exterior, soft heart, too young to be so hopeless. They said if I didn't confess, they'd arrest my mom for negligence, Marcus had told him. Said they'd put my little sisters in foster care. I was 14. I didn't know what to do. The motion Priya filed on Marcus's behalf named several current officers, men who'd learned their trade from Mills but were still on the force. Within days, the threats escalated. A brick through the center's window at 2 in the morning, a note attached, "Stop digging or get buried." David filed a police report, knowing it would go nowhere. The officer who took it, a young black woman named Officer Williams, whispered as she left, "Be careful. You're making enemies of people who don't forgive." Already did that 25 years ago, David replied. The breakthrough in Marcus Thompson's case came from an unexpected source. One of Mills's former partners, Detective Ray Hutchinson, was dying of liver disease. His conscience, apparently, was eating at him as much as the cirrhosis. "I want immunity," Hutchinson said when Cal visited him in hospice. "Full immunity, and I'll tell you everything." "You don't deserve immunity," Cal said bluntly. "No," Hutchinson agreed. "But Marcus Thompson deserves freedom. You want to save him or you want revenge on me?" It was David who made the call. Take the deal, he told Priya. The living matter more than punishing the dying. Hutchinson's testimony was damning. He detailed how they'd picked Marcus because he fit a profile: young, black, prior juvenile contacts with police, family too poor to afford real lawyers. How they'd held him for 9 hours without food or water, telling him his mother was being arrested, his sisters were being taken, until he broke and said what they wanted. The real killer was Donnie Morrison, Hutchinson said. White kid from the suburbs, buying drugs in the wrong neighborhood. He shot the dealer when the deal went bad, but a white kid from Grosse Pointe? No way were we arresting him. So we found Marcus. The hearing for Marcus Thompson's case became a media circus. The old guard rallied, police union representatives appearing on every news show to defend their members, to paint David and his team as anti-police radicals trying to destroy law and order. During the hearing, things got worse. The prosecutor, an ambitious assistant DA named Jennifer Walsh, went after David personally. Mr. Walker, isn't it true that you have a vendetta against the Detroit Police Department? I have a vendetta against injustice, David replied calmly. You served 25 years in prison. That must have made you angry. It made me determined. Determined to tear down the system that put you there. Determined to fix it so it stops putting innocent people in cages. Walsh smiled coldly. Or perhaps determined to free guilty people as some form of revenge? Priya objected, but the damage was done. The headlines the next day read, Ex-con's crusade, justice or revenge? That night, someone firebombed Benji's car. He'd been inside the center, working late on documentation for the Thompson case. The explosion lit up the night, bringing fire trucks and more police than had ever responded to their calls for help. Could have been you in there, the arson investigators said, not quite hiding his indifference. But it wasn't, Benji replied. And I'm not stopping. The turning point came when Officer Williams, the young cop who'd taken David's report about the brick, approached Amara outside her clinic. I shouldn't be here, Williams said, looking around nervously. Then why are you? Because I became a cop to help people, not to cover up crimes. She handed Amara a flash drive. Dashcam footage from the night Marcus was arrested. The official footage was corrupted. This isn't. The footage showed everything. Marcus being dragged from his home, his mother screaming, his sisters crying. It showed him in the back of the squad car, clearly stating he didn't do anything, that he didn't even know the victim. It showed the arresting officers laughing, one saying, "Kid'll confess by morning." They always do. When Priya played the footage in court, the room went silent. Even Walsh looked shaken. The judge, an older man who'd been skeptical of the motion, removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. I've seen enough, he said. The confession was clearly coerced. The conviction is vacated. Mr. Thompson is to be released immediately. Marcus Thompson walked out of prison 3 days later, into his mother's arms, his sisters clinging to his legs. David stood back, watching, remembering his own release. But this time, it had only taken 3 years to free an innocent man, not 25. Progress slow but real. The celebration at the center that night was subdued. They'd won, but they all knew the cost was mounting. Cal's career in law enforcement was over. Benji had been blacklisted from most major publications. Amara was fighting constant battles to keep her license. And David was tired in a way that 25 years in prison hadn't made him tired. Maybe we should slow down, Amara suggested. Take fewer cases, let things cool off. You know who can't slow down? David asked. The innocent people still inside. Every day we take off is another day they lose. But if they destroy us, we can't help anyone, Benji pointed out. David looked at the photos on the wall, dozens of families they'd helped, lives they'd changed. Then he looked at his 3 kids, worn down but still fighting. They've been trying to destroy us for 25 years, he said. We're still here. That's our power. We endure. We survive. And we keep fighting. The next morning, there was an envelope under the center's door. Inside, a single sheet of paper with 5 names, 5 case numbers, and a note. These ones are innocent. I can't come forward, but you'll find what you need if you look. A friend. David recognized the handwriting. Officer Williams, risking everything to do the right thing. 5 more cases, he told the team. 5 more innocent people we can save. Cal looked at the list, already planning his investigation. Benji started searching for patterns in the cases. Amara began reaching out to the families. They were battered, threatened, exhausted. But they were not broken. The system had tried to destroy them individually and failed. Now it was trying to destroy them collectively, and it would fail again. Because they had something the system didn't understand. They had each other. They had family. And that was stronger than any threat, any retaliation, any attempt to silence them. The call came at 3 in the morning, 2 weeks after Marcus Thompson's release. David fumbled for his phone, still groggy from sleep. Mr. Walker? The voice was unfamiliar, official. This is Warden Stevens at Macomb Correctional. I'm calling about James Mitchell. James Mitchell was one of the 5 names Officer Williams had provided. 43 years old, serving life for a murder committed in 1999. David had just started investigating his case. What about him? David asked, suddenly wide awake. He attempted suicide last night. He's in the medical ward, stable, but he left a note. Said he couldn't wait any longer for justice. Said to tell you he was sorry for giving up. David sat in the darkness of his bedroom, feeling the weight of every innocent person still trapped behind bars. How many James Mitchells were there? How many had given up hope? I'm coming to see him, David said. Visiting hours are... I spent 25 years in that place. I know when visiting hours are. I'm coming now. The drive to the prison was surreal. 6 months ago, he'd left this place in Priya's car, free for the first time in decades. Now, he was voluntarily returning, passing through the same gates, hearing the same mechanical buzz of locks engaging. James Mitchell looked small in the hospital bed, wrists bandaged, eyes hollow. When he saw David, tears started flowing. You got out, James whispered. I thought maybe there was hope for me too. But it's been 24 years. My kids don't even remember me. My wife remarried. I got nobody fighting for me. You got us now, David said firmly. You got me, and I got 3 kids who know how to raise hell until justice gets done. You just got to hold on a little longer. How? James asked. How do you hold on when the whole world forgot you exist? David pulled up a chair, settled in like he had all the time in the world. Let me tell you about 3 homeless kids I met once, and how they saved my life just by needing me to save theirs. He stayed until visiting hours officially started, talking, listening, reminding James that he wasn't forgotten, wasn't alone. When he left, James was sitting up, eating breakfast, talking about his case with the spark of hope David recognized, the same spark that had kept him alive all those years. Back at the center, David called an emergency meeting. We're not moving fast enough, he said. James Mitchell almost died waiting for us to save him. How many others are that close to giving up? We're doing everything we can, Priya said. The legal system moves slowly. Then we go around it, David interrupted. We make noise they can't ignore. Benji, remember that podcast that covered my case? Wrongful? Yeah, they've called several times wanting to do a follow-up. Give them everything. All 5 cases Williams gave us. Make a series. Make it huge. That'll paint an even bigger target on us, Cal warned. Good, David said. Let them come. Every attack on us is more proof that we're right, that they're scared, that the truth is on our side. The podcast series launched 2 weeks later. The Detroit 5, Innocents on Death Row, became the #1 true crime podcast in the country within days. Benji had provided meticulous documentation. Amara gave psychological profiles showing how coercion worked. Cal detailed the investigation techniques that led to false convictions. And David told the human story, the cost in years and tears and lives destroyed. The public response was immediate and overwhelming. Protests formed outside the courthouse. Celebrity activists took up the cause. The governor's office was flooded with calls demanding pardons. But the establishment pushed back hard. David was arrested on bogus charges of inciting public disorder. The arrest was meant to be a message, but it backfired spectacularly. The image of David Walker, proven innocent after 25 years, being led away in handcuffs again became a rallying cry. Cal organized the response. Within hours, hundreds of people surrounded the police station, not violent but present, bearing witness, demanding David's release. Benji live-streamed everything, making sure the world watched. Amara worked the phones, getting lawyers, politicians, anyone with influence involved. After 16 hours, they released David without charges, but the damage to their credibility was done. Public opinion had shifted decisively. The governor, facing an election year, announced a clemency review board for all cases connected to the Mills corruption scandal. The hearing for the Detroit Five was scheduled for December 15th, almost exactly 26 years after David had first taken in 3 homeless kids. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity, with overflow rooms set up for media and public viewing. David testified first, not about the legal details, but about the human cost. "Every day in prison when you're innocent is a death," he said. "You die a little watching your kids grow up in pictures. You die a little when your mother passes and you can't attend her funeral. You die a little when the world moves on without you. These 5 men have been dying for decades. Today, you can stop their deaths. You can give them back their lives." One by one, the cases were presented. James Mitchell, the man who'd almost given up, listened from his wheelchair, still recovering. The evidence was overwhelming. Coerced confessions, planted evidence, paid witnesses, all following the Mills playbook. But the most powerful moment came when Officer Williams walked into the courtroom in full uniform. The gallery gasped. She'd been anonymous until now, the friend feeding them information. "I'm Officer Patricia Williams," she said, voice steady despite the career suicide she was committing. "I've been with the Detroit Police Department for 7 years. And I'm here to testify that the corruption didn't end with Mills. It's still happening. These 5 men are innocent, and everyone in the department knows it." She detailed the conversations she'd overheard, the evidence she'd seen destroyed, the pressure applied to maintain wrongful convictions rather than admit mistakes. When she finished, she removed her badge and gun, placing them on the witness stand. "I became a cop to protect and serve," she said. "I can't do that in a department that protects itself and serves injustice." The clemency board deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, the chairman, a former judge named Harrison, looked directly at David. "Mr. Walker, what you and your team have uncovered is not just individual injustices, but systemic failure of the highest order. The board unanimously recommends immediate clemency for all 5 men, and further recommends a full investigation of every conviction connected to this corruption." The courtroom erupted. James Mitchell collapsed, sobbing. The other 4 men, all attending via video link from various prisons, sat in stunned silence before breaking down. David felt Cal's hand on his shoulder, Benji's arm around his waist, Amara's head against his chest. They'd done it. They'd actually done it. But David wasn't done. Standing at the microphones outside the courthouse, with 5 exonerated men beside him and his 3 kids behind him, he made an announcement. "The Live Free Center is expanding. We're opening branches in 5 cities across Michigan. We're creating a network that ensures no innocent person fights alone. We're training the next generation of investigators, journalists, and advocates. Because this isn't about me or my story anymore. This is about making sure that what happened to us never happens to anyone again." The funding came from everywhere. The settlement money David had saved, donations from across the country, even a massive anonymous donation that Benji traced back to Samuel King, trying to buy redemption with the money he'd made from corruption. 6 months later, at the grand opening of the Live Free Center Detroit, now in a building 10 times the size of the original, David stood before a crowd of hundreds. The Detroit Five were there, free men rebuilding their lives. Officer Williams was there, now working as the center's liaison with law enforcement reform groups. Mrs. Patterson was there, in a wheelchair now, but still sharp, still proud. 26 years ago, David began, I was just a mechanic who took in 3 homeless kids. People said I was crazy. Maybe I was. But those 3 kids became my family, and that family became an army for justice. We've freed 43 innocent people so far. We've reformed policies that led to wrongful convictions. We've proven that ordinary people can fight extraordinary injustice and win. He paused, looking at Cal, Benji, and Amara, all standing on stage with him. But the most important thing we've proven is that family isn't about blood or documents or what anyone else says. Family is about choosing each other, fighting for each other, never giving up on each other. That's what stopped my life sentence. Not lawyers or evidence or even justice. It was love. The love of 3 kids who refused to let me disappear, who grew up to be heroes, not because of me, but in spite of everything the world threw at them. David pulled out the old photo from the community picnic, now framed and hanging in the center's main hall. This picture was taken at one of the happiest moments of our lives, before everything went wrong. But you know what? We're happier now, because we're not just surviving anymore. We're not just free. We're freeing others. We're changing the system that tried to destroy us. We're writing a new story, one where justice isn't just a word but a promise we keep. The applause was deafening, but David barely heard it. He was looking at his kids, successful, strong, still fighting, and thinking about that cold November night 26 years ago when he'd found them by a dumpster. He'd thought he was saving them. He understood now that they'd saved each other. "One more thing," David said as the crowd quieted. "To anyone out there who's been wrongfully convicted, who's sitting in a cell for something they didn't do, don't give up. We're coming for you. It might take time, longer than it should, but we're coming. Because that's what family does. We come for our own." As the event ended and people began to leave, a young boy, maybe 13, approached David. He was thin, wearing clothes that didn't quite fit, with the same wary eyes Cal had had all those years ago. "Mr. Walker," the boy said, "my dad's in prison. He didn't do what they said he did. Can you help?" David knelt down, looking the boy in the eyes. "What's your name, son?" "Marcus. Marcus Thompson, Jr." David smiled, remembering the Marcus Thompson they'd freed, now working as a paralegal at the center. "Well, Marcus, you came to the right place. We're going to look into your dad's case. But more than that, you're going to help us. Because that's how justice really works. Not from above, but from below, from families who refuse to give up." He stood, looking around the center at all the people working, fighting, refusing to accept injustice as inevitable. This was his real-life sentence. Not prison, but purpose, not punishment, but the promise to keep fighting until every innocent person was free. "Come on," he told young Marcus. "Let me introduce you to my kids. They know a thing or two about fighting for their father." As they walked deeper into the center, past the photos of freed inmates, past the legal library, past the rooms where hope was rebuilt one case at a time, David Walker understood that his life sentence had indeed been stopped. Not just the legal one, but the sentence of despair, of isolation, of believing that one person couldn't make a difference. 3 homeless kids had taught him otherwise. And now, together, they were teaching the world. If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful stories of justice, family, and the unbreakable bonds that form when people choose to fight for each other against all odds.